Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast. Greetings. This is Hugh Ballou. Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange. Significant things and people who have a message to share, a story to share, and some wisdom to impart. And my guest today is Dr. Charles Garfield, and he's way on the other coast, San Francisco, California. As you may remember, Center Vision is located in the Appalachians in central Western Virginia. And so we're in the South, and Dr. Garfield's on the other side of the country, but we're connected here virtually, and we've asked him to share his story today. He's a professor, he's an author, he's a lecturer, he's a thought leader. So Dr. Garfield, welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange, and tell people a little bit about yourself and your background and why you're doing this Shanti project.
Well, first, thanks for inviting me. The Shanti project is sort of the love of my life from a work point of view. It's been 46 years of training volunteers to work with people who are seriously ill, either cancer or AIDS or now COVID. And I started out as a young psychologist on a cancer unit where people were seriously ill, but sometimes got well enough to be sent home. And I always wondered what happened to them when they got home. They still were seriously ill. They still needed support and help. So I decided to start a volunteer project and to train volunteers in the various counseling skills necessary to care for people. All the individuals had to do was call a phone number and they could get a volunteer. And it's been, as I said, 46 years. The project has spawned all sorts of other organizations modeled after it around the world. And I'm extremely grateful because when AIDS hit, we still existed. We were still there to support people with this new disease. Now with COVID, same story, new disease. We're still here caring for people, doing the best we can. And there's been much good work done by tens of thousands of volunteers over the last almost half century.
Half century, wow. You did say 46 years ago. So how does your education and background in psychology help frame your work?
Well, I learned a lot of things about how to communicate with people, how to care for people, how to listen to their problems. I often say to the Shanti volunteers, and it holds here as well, that if you know how to listen from the heart, speak from the heart, and act from the heart, you can make an enormous difference in the lives of people who are really up against it. So a lot of what I learned in graduate school in a wonderful program, I went to University of California at Berkeley and learned a lot about psychology and counseling.
Dr. Garfield, we seem to have a little trouble with your audio feed. Are you there? We're experiencing a little bit of technical backup today. So let's see if we're going to be able to get Dr. Garfield back. Okay, we got cut off a little bit when you talked about graduate school. So can you pick it up there? We had a little technical snafu.
A lot of what I learned in graduate school in a wonderful doctoral program in clinical psychology are counseling skills and communication skills and caregiving skills that can be taught to regular folks, that can be taught to volunteers. And that's the basic premise of Shanti Project, that you can train people in all walks of life in the various skills necessary to care for people who are really up against it, who are dealing with one difficult situation, usually disease related, or another, cancer, AIDS, now COVID, same story. So we're still running. We still have tens of thousands of volunteers over the years have done extraordinary work, both here and elsewhere in the country and overseas. And I'm very, very proud that Shanti exists and very fortunate to have founded the organization.
What's the origin of that name?
It's a Sanskrit word that refers to inner peace. It translates roughly as the peace that surpasses understanding. It's the kind of peace that people who are really up against it rarely have, but sometimes get when they meet somebody in just the right way, when there's a good connection between two human beings. And that's what we teach our volunteers.
So in the training for volunteers, that must be, you must have some really tight protocol on how you do it, because sometimes I served the mega churches for 40 years, and sometimes well-meaning people do more harm than good. So tell us a little bit about the training that people go, because a lot of us, when you hear about some of these diseases, you want to go and hide. You certainly don't want to go out and be vulnerable and help people. So there's a mindset to this. There's probably some safety requirements that you have in place, but there's also some behavioral norms, for lack of a better word. How do people understand the engagement process and be able to bring benefit to others?
Well, interestingly enough, we do an enormous amount of what we call role plays and real plays. The role plays are play acting situations that the volunteer will likely get into so that they know what to do when they get there. We go through the same situations over and over again so that people are really skilled at providing the kind of support we want them to provide. And the real play is even more intense. We'll bring in people who are dealing with one of the illnesses that we deal with, and we have them talk to various volunteers and do a real play. They talk about the patient will talk about situations from his or her life, and the volunteer will learn how to respond and get feedback from the people who are watching the interaction. There's a circle of volunteers, and then there are two people in the middle of that circle, a patient and a volunteer, and they go through all sorts of scenarios based on what's going on in the life of that patient. And they get feedback, the volunteer gets feedback from other volunteers and from the, we have had much problem with people saying the wrong things or doing something that was disadvantageous. Our volunteers, the feedback they get from their clients is overwhelmingly positive.
So I guess there's some volunteers that want to help, but don't make the grade because they're screened out for some emotional reason or some personal agenda that may not be helpful. How do you qualify? I don't know if it's a certification process, but how do you qualify people that you can actually put into service?
Raising a wonderful point. We do screen people pretty carefully. And if somebody has an agenda that they have, a belief system that's theirs and they're trying to convert everybody to it, that's not a good sign. If somebody wants to be a volunteer but really should be a client, in other words, they've gone through something rough in their own life and they think that they're ready to serve, well, often it's not an appropriate time. They need to support themselves. And there are various other reasons why we would screen somebody and make sure that they get some good feedback, but are not allowed to be a volunteer. They're not ready for what we're providing. We're pretty cautious about that.
In my studies of Murray Bowen's work, a psychiatrist, he talks about leadership concepts, 8 of them, and makes us aware of ourselves by studying our family of origin. And embedded in all that work is as how we show up. And leaders who are anxious have spread this. There's another kind of pandemic of anxiety. So with how do volunteers help volunteers? Because you're dealing with some of these people that have really bad situations, I'm sure. How do you help people manage themselves in the face of anxiety, in the face of adversity, and manage their own anxiety? Because it's not good to show up with anxiety, is it?
Well, we all have anxiety in our current world. If you're not anxious, you're not paying attention. There's a lot to be anxious about. So if you can normalize that anxiety and let people know that although it's uncomfortable, it's fairly universal right now. And one of the ways to deal with the anxiety specifically is to ask questions about what would mitigate it, what would make it less severe, what action steps can you take that would allow you to feel less anxious. And we help people brainstorm. We help people think it through. Not all sources of anxiety can be dealt with. We're dealing with a pandemic right now that's making everybody anxious. Anybody who's paying attention, that's for sure. But we can deal with what can be done during this time of the pandemic that might serve that person well in their lives. I wrote a book recently called Our Wisdom Years. It's about what older people do in rough times and in good times. And we ask and answer the question in the book, how can you deal with times when you're really up against it, when things are really tough? What are the best ways of handling those situations? So you can take action and help mitigate the anxiety.
We're still having a little bit of breakup. I'm going to show the Amazon page. If you're listening on the podcast without the benefit of the video, you can go to Amazon, and the book is listed there. Charles Garfield, PhD, Our Wisdom Years, Growing Older with Joy, Fulfillment, Resilience, and No Regrets. Well, that's an inspiring title. What helped you come to that? It's really hard to create a title for a book, having written several myself. It's really hard to come up with a title. How did you come up? That's a very compelling title.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I get a lot of good feedback on the title, and one of the ways we came up with the title was by asking older people what they cared about most.
Reporting back. So we are having some. I just unmuted you, but it's not unmuting, Dr. Garfield. You were talking about when you left us there. You want to pick it up where you were, the wisdom years and managing anxiety and taking it forward from there.
Well, when I wrote Our Wisdom Years, I was aiming at what would be the actual situations facing older people who understood that this was a different phase of life than adulthood. We're living much longer now. People may retire, although even the word doesn't work for a lot of people, but they may retire at 65 or 70 or whenever they do. They may live decades at that point. The fastest growing group in our nation are centenarians, people over 100. And so if you're 70 or 75, you may live another 25 or 30 years. That's a whole new stage of life with a different set of potentials, a different set of possibilities. That's what I wrote about in the book. That's why we talk about joy and fulfillment and resilience and no regrets.
I love it. I love it. And I shared with you before we went live with the interview is that as a conductor, I look at some of the profound people who've influenced our musical art form. And Giuseppe Verdi, opera composer, was one of them. And he started out with very classical music like Rigoletto, and he went through a romantic period. And then his third period is pushing the envelope past romanticism into the next era. And it was pieces like the big Requiem he wrote and Otello, the opera. So the critics said he was senile, but he was so far advanced, they couldn't keep up with his thinking. They wanted to be, just nice and neat like a classical composition, but it was pushing that envelope forward. So, and I think he was in his 80s at that point. Beethoven wrote his greatest stuff when he was senior. Hans Liszt wrote a lot of piano pieces when he was in his senior years. So there's a good precedent in many fields. I just happen to know more about the music field, but and Robert Shaw was conducting into his 80s and was a world influencer in his senior years. So there's more to this, the senior thing. So appreciate you bringing it up. my peer group has shifted to, when I served music ministry in churches, my peer group was the 3rd to 6th graders. Now it's the aging community. So it's a whole different perspective. But, we have collected wisdom, and I show up and people introduce me as a speaker and they say I'm an expert on leadership. I like to say, no, I'm a student in leadership. I've made so many mistakes. I'm studying what caused them. And so maybe making the mistakes is the culmination of wisdom. So there's a couple of things you've talked about that I'd like to unpack. One is the founding of the nonprofit. And I want to go back to talk about how you actually took your concept and launched it. But before that, you've spoken about an enormous number of volunteers. And in my 32 years of working with nonprofit leaders and their boards, one of the central themes that comes up is we have trouble getting volunteers. And in the church, we can't get people to volunteer to do things. Our members won't step up. So what is the secret to recruiting and empowering and engaging volunteers in meaningful work?
Well, the one thing I would say to anybody who's paying attention to our conversation is that we have any trouble with volunteers. We've never had any training or
And so we took a little break, a technology break, and we're back with Dr. Garfield. And I asked him the question that comes up often in my work with nonprofit leaders and boards. And it's about, how do you get volunteers? And you were saying it wasn't a problem. So explain that, would you?
Well, we've never had any problem in 46 years getting volunteers. 6 times a year, we do trainings. 6 times a year, I open the training and I'm looking out at 25 or 30 potential new volunteers. And if you ask the question, well, how is that so? Why don't we have any trouble? You have to answer the question, what do you offer your volunteers? Not what are they about to give their clients, but what do you offer them? And we offer volunteers a set of skills that are life skills. They tell us, a lot of the trainings, you know, yes, what do we offer our volunteers? That's why they keep coming back. That's why they tell their friends about being a volunteer. That's why they say that being a volunteer at Shanti Project is one of the most powerful and wonderful experiences they've ever had in their lives. So it's based on what we offer them. We teach them things that are life skills, how to communicate, how to listen from the heart, how to speak from the heart, how to act from the heart, how to live a life of fulfillment, how to teach your clients how to do that. That's why the book, and if I switch gears here a little, and fulfillment and resilience and no regrets, those are the things that the clients at Shanti Project talk about. And we talk about how to address those issues. They're issues that are important both to the volunteer and also to the client.
Is there a median age for your volunteers?
We have a lot of younger people. We have some older people. It's across the lifespan. People are interested in usually here. So it's people.
Let's go again. So you're offering volunteers life skills, and you said something radical here. They actually invite their friends. How does that happen?
Well, they have a good experience as a volunteer. They talk about their volunteer experience to their friends, and their friends get excited and ask, can I sign up also? Can I become a volunteer? And then they call us and we screen those new potential volunteers, and some of them make the cut and join us. But it's word of mouth. There's a lot of word of mouth transmission at Shanti.
So you're not begging people to come in, you're offering them an opportunity of service, and they have to qualify to meet that threshold, right?
That's exactly right. You said it perfectly. We're not begging people to come and be volunteers, not by a long shot.
That actually repels people in some sense. And also, I've been around, and I saw this happen a lot in the church. People would want to get volunteers for committees, and they'd say, "Oh, would you serve on this committee? Oh, it's not much work." And you know right away they're lying to you. You know, why should I step up if there's not much work? I want to do something that's meaningful. So in your experience, what's the biggest mistake leaders make in trying to recruit volunteers?
I think you said it very well. They try to beg people to come in the door and do some work, and they never mention what that potential volunteer is going to get out of it. What are they going to learn? What are they going to? It's not only about service, and of course, service is an important aspect, but there's also service to the volunteer. What does the organization provide the volunteer so that he or she will want to join you, will want to do the volunteer work? It's not just coercing people to come and do some free labor. That's not what it's about. It's about life skills. It's about teaching them things that they can value.
All right, we got some questions. You willing to entertain some questions from our participants here?
I'm ready.
All right. So we have Bob Hopkins, who's in Dallas, Texas. He authored the book Philanthropy Misunderstood, and he's taught me a lot about philanthropy. He is muted. So Bob, if you want to unmute yourself, you're able to ask Dr. Garfield a question. So Bob Hopkins, you're live.
Yeah, Dr. Garfield, how are you doing? Bob Hopkins here from Dallas, Texas.
Thanks for calling, Bob.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm an older person, and I am going through boxes right now of all of my old stuff. And I'm finding old letters and old pictures, and I'm kind of getting teary-eyed and thinking about all of my life, because I've lived longer than Hugh, which is a long time, as you can imagine. So anyway, I had a student call me yesterday, and he said, my girlfriend just broke up with me, and I vomited this morning, and I just am devastated, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I said, well, you know what? God has a plan, and obviously she's not in the plan. And God will reveal to you what it is that you're supposed to end up with, or who we're supposed to end up with at another time, and that you can't have any regrets. And then I come and listen to you talking about not having any regrets. So thank you very much for backing me up when I said those statements to him. Why can't you have any regrets? What if you did happen to make a better choice? Because I ask people all the time, if you had to do it over again, what would you do? And they always come up with a whole bunch of things.
We all have some regrets that we start out with. The question is, how do you handle those regrets? And a forgiveness letter to yourself or to somebody else about things that happened that you're regretting. You might never forget the situation, but you can forgive, and you can let go of any of that regret that people often carry with them to the end of their lives. The saddest thing we've ever encountered were people on their deathbeds talking about what they most regretted, talking about the things that they could have done something about but didn't. So what we're saying when we say no regrets is not that you don't start out having regrets. I think we all have something that we might regret, but it's how you handle it. It's what you do with it. Can you lay the burden down?
Love it, love it, love it. So Bob Hopkins, you virtually have showed up. You were a guest on the show months ago, but you've now moved into being a super volunteer with Center Vision Leadership Foundation. What motivated you to say, I want to participate with this and I want to share my gifts? What was in it for you, and what was the idea that came in your mind that said, I'm interested in this?
Well, you know, I was at a point in my life where I decided I needed to continue to search for meaning and purpose. And so far, our relationship in the 2 or 3 months that I've been here has been fulfilled. You're fulfilling my needs. And as long as that continues to happen, of course, I'll continue to stick around. I'm a volunteer, by the way, and you know, it's true. Volunteers have to be treated right, and you need to always look at what their purpose is in being a volunteer. And because I'm a nonprofit person, I've had volunteers all my life, and they come and they go. And I keep going back to the same ones who keep saying yes, 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 yes. And then finally somebody says, Bob, you're going to wear them out. And then I usually do. And they finally leave when it's time. But, you know, I think you can overextend your welcome too, you know, Hugh. So therefore, you know, I don't want to get too pushy on my needs on you so that you have to one day say, Bob, we've had enough of you. Thanks a lot, but we need to move on.
Well, in my life in the church, I've fired many volunteers who thought it was a favor, but you're not on that anywhere close to that list. I will tell you. So Bob's a man of great talents and passion. So thank you for sharing here. So I'm going to explore. So Bob, I'm going to let you go back to being quiet here. And so Dr. Garfield, our show is sponsored by our printer. We publish a magazine, Nonprofit Performance 360 magazine, and you'll be getting a letter from Sandy, who's on here, an email asking if you want to contribute. Oops, I lost Bob. Oh, where did I? Oh, Bob's here. He's still here. So we're asking if you want to contribute to the magazine. It's the purpose is to talk about issues that leaders face, and you know, nothing happens without leadership, and many things don't happen. You talked about the regrets. You know, in my years in leading different initiatives, I wake up and think about, what if I'd done this? And I try not to do that to myself because that's pretty harsh. So you're writing a letter to yourself, a forgiveness letter. That was brilliant. That's brilliant. So thank you for that wisdom around. So Bob has taught me about philanthropy and people showing up and contributing to our organization with their time and their talent and their money, are showing true philanthropy in all its forms. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. You give in many different ways. The Shanti volunteers don't give money; they give time. They give time and they give their best self, their best effort. And what we find is that people are enormously gratified by the opportunity to serve. That's why I always say, and I've said it a number of times here, that we don't have trouble getting volunteers because they get so much out of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, sometimes it takes a paradigm shift. In the last church that I served, we abolished the word volunteer because we determined, it was United Methodist Church in Alabama, we determined that asking people to volunteer was contrary to the theology we were professing. So we turned the term into members in ministry. So they were servant leaders in ministry, and we gave them purposeful work. And it was interesting that paradigm shift. We had more people. We were full time, you know, resourcing all of our members who wanted to do meaningful work, and people kept coming from other churches to see what we were doing, and was it illegal? So people were very passionate about sharing their talents and engaging in the multiple ministries of the church. So sometimes we need to take a fresh approach at how do we call something a name, or how do we approach the opportunity? And I think there's lots of ways that leaders don't do service to inviting people in to share their passion. They really assume that it's too much work for somebody that's busy, rather than letting that person determine that for themselves. Do you find that to be true in other organizations? I'm sure it must not be true in your organization because you're so successful. Uh-oh. So I just we're coming back with Dr. Charles Garfield. Now, you had a concept, was it 46 years ago, and it became the Shanti project. And so how did you move this into reality? There's lots of people that have ideas, but they stumble in making it work. So you've obviously made this concept work. What are your secrets for success?
Well, one of the main secrets of success, if you want to call it a secret, is I didn't know any better. I didn't know, I didn't know that I couldn't do it. If I had asked the doctors or the nurses or the mental health professionals, they would have told me it was impossible. Fortunately, I never asked permission. I just went ahead and did it. So by getting a list of people together who I thought might be good volunteers, by contacting each of them, by screening the ones that I thought would volunteers and selecting those people, they became the first 15 Shanti volunteers all those years ago. It was something that I wasn't sure was going to work, but I just didn't think much about failure. Failure didn't seem to be much of an option since we needed to help those people who were really up against it. And they heard the message. The new volunteers heard the message. They understood that this was a chance to really make a difference in the lives of people who were struggling. And it mattered to them. They cared about it. They showed up. They paid attention. They cared deeply. All of those things that signal the best in human beings. And that's been true for the last 46 years. So we're not having to, as I said earlier, coerce anybody into doing this work. They're more than willing to join us.
Great, and it's rewarding work because people keep coming. So special challenges during this time of quarantine. We're recording this. You may be listening to it years from now on the podcast, but we're recording it several months into the COVID-19, and we have some special challenges now where some organizations are not having volunteers show up. So what are the challenges today that are special?
Well, it's hard to know how to make a big difference in somebody's life when you can't meet with them, when you can't have face-to-face contact with them, or you can't do it very easily. The question, special challenges now are finding out what people really need. We work with some older people or people who are living alone who are infirmed. And how do they get food? How do they eat? They can't go shopping. They're not supposed to go out. They may not be capable of going out physically. So we provide the kind of service that people say to us they need at this particular time. We're not so bold that we think we know all the answers. Ask your clients, ask the people you want to serve what they most need, and then go about meeting those needs as best you can.
So what is the most important skills that leaders need to teach this pool of volunteers?
Well, I mentioned a few of them. Learn to listen from the heart, really listen. Most of the time when we talk to somebody, we pretend to be listening, but we're really paying attention to our own thoughts, not to them. Really listen deeply to what the person is saying to them, to saying to you, and what they're not saying to you, what the unspoken messages are. Then speak from the heart. Speak your truth as best you know it. Don't pretend to be an expert. Don't fall back on all sorts of book learning, although there's nothing wrong with a good idea from a book, but it may not be the source of your ultimate contribution. What do you know to be true from your own life? And share that with the other person, and then act from the heart. Do those little things that may have seismic consequences, enormous consequences, little things that make a difference. One of the volunteers the other day told me that their client loved their garden but couldn't get out into the garden anymore because they're physically not able. So he brings his client flowers, and she loves it. She can't wait to see him because she can't wait to get the new batch of flowers. Little things that seem incidental, that seem like they don't make a difference, can have tremendous consequences in the lives of people who are really shut out of participation because of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So from where I sit as a strategist, strategy is inseparable from leadership, from organizational performance. And I see that strategy is a framework for engagement. People know what to do. So how is setting goals helpful to people who serve the organization as volunteers?
Well, setting goals are important, but let me go through very briefly go through the 5 elements that we teach our volunteers, that are 5 elements that leaders can benefit from. First, what's your mission? Mission and goals are different. Mission and goals are different. Goals are steps toward completing the mission. But what's the overarching mission? Goals are dreams with deadlines. Dreams with deadlines.
Written down.
Written down, absolutely. Short term, intermediate, and long term. Mission first, then goals, then feedback. Who do you get feedback from? Where you can make an assessment of how you're doing and what changes might you make and what are you doing well. Feedback isn't always negative feedback. It can be positive feedback, positive reinforcement. Mission, goals, feedback, resources, especially training. What resources do you need to excel? Do you have the training you need to do the work you're committed to doing? And then rewards. What do you want out of it? What are the ultimate rewards you get? So mission, goals, feedback, resources, especially training, and rewards.
Wow, that's a really good list. We will transcribe this episode, and it will be on the website. And you can go to the Nonprofit Exchange, and you can see what's up next, what was the last interview, and then on the page you can click on the archives to see interviews from the past 6.5 years. So Dr. Garfield, I'm going to give a sponsor message here, then we're going to come back to you for a final thought or challenge. But before I do that, I want to see if Professor Hopkins has another thought or question he wanted to share. Bob, you're muted.
I got it. Okay, here I am. Thank you. Yeah, Hugh, you asked me a question a few minutes ago. What am I getting out of working with you? And I said, I'm trying to find my purpose, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, one of the, no matter how old you are, networking is still a real important part of who I am and what I do. I teach it to my students. I think it's really important that you gather together around you a circle of influence, those people who are going to make things happen for you and with you. And this is what I have learned from you already, Hugh, is that I have gathered and gained so many new friends that I would have never known before had I not participated with you. Now, that doesn't mean that I have to know everybody in the world, but I do think, as I said, God has a plan and why I'm supposed to meet with the folks that I met with already that are going to be part of what I do in the future. Number 2 is, of course, you and I put on together Youth and Philanthropy International Conference last week. We had 60, 75 students and people from around the world who were actually on this event. And had you not been able to host it as Zoom, I would not have had the excellence and turnout, I don't think, that I got, because you know what, I'm a novice and you're not, you're a professional. And so you made it happen, and thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Plus, you have a magazine called Performance, and I'm excited because I used to have a magazine as well. I'm jealous of you because you still have it. I don't have mine. Mine, I did a 12-year run, and it was a good run. I loved it. But we're going to redo this magazine, and we're going to make it into the next one, at least the January issue. We're going to make it not about nonprofit leaders necessarily so, but how about donors, people who are really philanthropists, who are giving of their resources and their time and their money to nonprofit organizations. And so I'm actually going to participate in that effort, and I hope that people who might listen to this podcast will actually look for the new issues of Performance, because they are really a resource. And I know the printed word is kind of going out, but for some of us, the printed word is what we love. And I love magazines and newspapers, and instead of just having to go to Google every time I want to learn something. So anyway,
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say.
Well, good. And I've also, back to you, I've met people and you've taught me things. So, it's a two-way street, Dr. Garfield. It's a two-way street. So this is a cover of our magazine, and there's a woman almost 100 and wrote for this, and she happens to be an expert on millennials. So Frances Hesselbein in New York still goes to work every day in an office created by Metropolitan Insurance for her. So I'm going to talk about our sponsor just a minute, and then back to you for a closing thought or challenge for people. WordSprint is the printer, but it's more than a printer. It's a connector for Center Vision Leadership Foundation. And for 2 decades, they've done research. Bill Gilmer and his team at WordSprint have done research about what keeps people active, donating, volunteering, supporting in the various ways, in the philanthropic work that we do as for-purpose organizations. We're not about for-profit, we're about for-purpose. So Bill Gilmer and his team do the mail. It's the print media. It goes in people's hands and they remember you. So it's 30% the message, 30% the person, 30% right rhythm, and 10% the appearance. So keeping in front of your donors and your supporters lets them know what's happening with their work and their money and keeps them engaged. So wordsprint.com, check with Bill Gilmer and his team and see how you can learn how to keep your tribe activated. It's one thing to get them in, it's another thing to keep them active and engaged. So Dr. Charles Garfield is an expert in this, been doing it for 46 years. What do you want to leave us with today? This has been so helpful. You're muted. Okay, I tried, let me unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
I think the most important thing I can say that we haven't said so far is embedded in the answer to the question, what are you most grateful for in your life? When I take a look at people responding to Shanti Project, to my book, Our Wisdom Years, one of the things that they talk about most frequently when they review their lives, what are they most grateful for? So I would suggest that anybody paying attention to our conversation, ask themselves the question, what are the 2 or 3 things that they're most grateful for in their lives? And how can they build on those things to make sure that they enter into the later stages of their life with joy and fulfillment and no regrets?
Thank you, Dr. Garfield. You'll find his interview transcription at thenonprofitexchange.org. You'll find the picture of his book there, and you'll also, Our Wisdom Years, and you'll also find a link to the Shanti website. Thank you for being our guest today on the Nonprofit Exchange.
Thank you very much.